Welcome to Therapy Sessions Cutting Toxic Family Ties. My name is Dr. Sherry Campbell, and I'm your host. I am a leading expert in the niche of toxic family abuse, and although my show cannot substitute for therapy, it is a survivor-based show. In me, you're not only going to get an expert, but you're also going to get a survivor, as I have also survived toxic family abuse. I know how hard it is. The goal I have is to give voice to the voiceless, to provide skills to help you to protect your peace, to stand your solid ground, and to navigate and heal the heartbreaks caused by toxic family. Please have a pen and paper available to give voice to your thoughts as you listen to each show. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for your bravery. So let the healing begin. Welcome, everyone, to Therapy Sessions, Cutting Toxic Family Ties. I have a really special guest today. His name is David Weeks, and he is just an advocate for talking about complex trauma and how he ended up in the place that he is. I do not want to rob him of his own story. So, David, tell us a little bit about you, and then we will dive into all the questions.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much for having me and allowing me to share my story. I very much view it as a privilege because I know not everyone has the ability or resources to do so. So thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
I am an advocate for child abuse survivors, specifically complex trauma. I was very much raised in a cult-like structure with my family. Very much the authoritarian parenting, do as I say, don't talk back, don't have a voice. From reading, previous stories, because I feel like we all kind of share similar things in our own little quirks. Like it was very much the Menendez story was very much similar to me.
Oh, wow.
And just like guns involved. No one was murdered in my story, but very much, intimidation, coercive control, sex trafficking, abuse. And so I use my story to help, break the silence around male survivors of trauma because there is so much stigma around it. And it's unfortunate, but most men don't speak about it. And on average, it takes 20 to 30 years for someone to do so. And so not only do I want to help, survivors of all survivors, but really help survivors with male voices, help break the stigma around it because, so many are struggling. And so I think the conversation is much needed.
I agree. And I love my men, and I love having men on my show. I don't think the male voice is strong enough with the sort of female takeover. I even notice in not just family, but in a lot of female teachers tend to have sex with their students. And it's wild looking in the comments, and you'll see people saying, wow, I wish she was my teacher. And this boy has been completely abused, and they tend to stay their faces out of the public when it's not their fault, whereas girls are much more front facing. And so I do think we need to create a culture that allows male sexual abuse victims of family or non-family to come out into the public. I have so many questions. Did your family traffic you, or was it, so it's your family wasn't in a cult, your family was run like a cult, which most toxic families are. How did the trafficking happen?
Yeah. So, my story, it was almost like the perfect storm, I call it. And being socially isolated most of my life, was raised in social isolation. I would be grounded, for the slightest infractions. At the most extreme, I would have, a coloring book, a crown maker, and a puzzle to entertain myself in my room. So very much, the starvation of, attachment. And you have that piece. And then you also have, I started puberty when I was 7. So I started it very early.
Yeah.
For most people who don't know, boys start it around anything anything before age 9 is when it becomes problematic because they become ahead of their age, what's maturity appropriate for them. So I was starting at 7. Most people started around age 11 to 10. So by the time I was already, 12, 13, I already was having, hormones released as an 18-year-old would have. So
Oh,
there's,
wow.
that piece. And then you also add the piece of being gay and being alienated, being the only one in your class that was different. It started out, with I was trafficked through the apps. So I feel like our definition of trafficking is very outdated. I think many people are trafficked, not just, through monetary, they get something in return. It could be something as simple as they're being seen for the first time or they're being made to feel special. And I think when you're starved of your primary needs so much, that becomes even more powerful than any monetary physical object can represent. And so I was at a young age, I was shown an appropriate movie that had, a sex scene in it. As any curious 11, 12-year-old boy, I was like, what's a sex scene? There was never conversations around it. So what does anyone do? I go to the internet and thousands of pornographies, pop up. And I'm like, whoa, what is this? And my understanding was, people who had sex love each other, right? And so in my definition, I was like, well, these people must love each other. What can I figure out about what they're doing so that I can get loved by my parents? And so, and then, that's quickly turned into now I'm on adult websites. And now I am, interacting with people who are older than me.
Mhm.
And this one individual, he gained my trust over, a course of a couple of weeks. I think the idea of us having sex definitely passed through my brain, but, I was just so impressionable at 13 and
Oh, yeah.
so naive. Like, I don't even have my frontal cortex isn't even, developed by then. And so he lures me out of my house, picks me up at midnight. And we get to the end of the driveway. He puts his hand on my thigh. And then that's when I knew everything like started crashing and I started shaking, and I explain it like, I was shaking like it's 30 degrees out. Like I am terrified. He, ends up, taking me to his house and where he assaults me. But then like he normalizes it for me. In my mind, I was like, oh, it's normal for it to feel, uncomfortable the first time you have sex, right? And so I went back to him. I kept going back to him, and he was able to provide me some, I guess, attachment that my parents weren't giving me. I was being told that you do look good, that your thighs do look good, that your voice is masculine. And so I was being, reassured and having needs met that I wasn't being met by my parents. And so then that led to other people on the apps, I already have this one experience and the apps itself almost becomes, the pimp.
Sure. That makes sense.
And a lot of times it felt good. I think sometimes we think child sexual abuse is this really scary, horrific event where like the child is, it feels horrendous. And, that's is certainly the case for some people, but a lot of times it feels good. And it
Mhm.
isn't until they get older and
Mhm.
they have the a different lens to be like, holy crap, I was sexually abused as a kid. And then that's when, everything kind of unravels. And that's certainly what happened for me. And, the thing is, my parents and doctors knew I was being trafficked. Like they knew I was on these adult websites, sending pictures of myself with search engines in my phone for, motels and hotels. And, no one ever asked, David, is someone hurting you? Are you unsafe? It was, you're going to ruin the family. You're going to ruin the family image. Your mom's going to lose her job as a teacher. Your stepfather's going to lose his security clearance. And you're going to break this family apart. And even my doctors, like they would enable my parents with the messaging saying that you're the bad child, that you wanted this. And like, because I would be socially isolated it would make me run to them even more. And a lot of times, like I say, the sexual abuse almost made the abuse at home durable because I knew someone thought I was special.
Yeah, I've treated of a lot of sexual abuse victims throughout 30 years of clinical training and experience. I don't ever have a clean practice where at least two people are have not had that experience. Most of them were made and groomed to feel that it was a very special, loving, cuddly relationship. I haven't yet treated one person where they felt raped, so to speak. They felt unsafe, but the grooming, is such a huge part of making a child feel safe is the whole way to get the child to do what you want. Right. So I think that most common, what I've seen, at least in my practice over 30 years, is that it is your experience. It's the grooming, and whether it's the teacher, whether it's whatever. But I think the most important piece of what you're saying is when there's no attachment at home, you're emotionally starved, you feel emotionally homeless. We need attachment. It's biological to our humanity to find it. And touch is one of the best ways to feel loved and to feel complimented. Another thing I think you said that's important is being different, right? You being gay, probably made, things worse somehow. I don't know how your family looks at that, which we will dive into, but if they don't accept it, just that alone could ruin the optics of the family, right? And it's like, God doesn't make junk. So it's heartbreaking, and I appreciate that you pointed out that the internet is a way. And it's interesting that you're getting blamed for trafficking yourself by your physicians and your family at 13.
I had one psychiatrist even went as far as telling me if this was my child, I would have reported them and had them locked up and diagnosed me as being autistic. I think when we talk about sexual violence, it's usually a male perpetrator and a female victim. And
Yeah.
I think, we think as male sexual assault as being rare, as this 1 in 6. I would argue it's 1 in 4. And some research has shown that it is more because boys make the perfect target. Like they're not going to tell. If they do tell, no one's going to believe them. And
Those statistics are based on what's reported.
reported exactly. And most cases are not reported.
I think what's hard is there's such a homophobic
Component to
situation
it.
going on. Okay. And did you see the documentary that came out about that mother who was stalking her own daughter for like 2
Yes.
years?
Yes.
Okay. So she was also stalking the daughter's boyfriend who was 13 and being overtly sexual in the messages to him. She did not get registered. She did not have to register as a sex offender. Had it been a male doing that stalking of his son's girlfriend, that man would have been registered as a sex offender. It is totally lopsided.
It is.
And I think that men are more afraid to report because even if they're a straight man that's been molested by an adult male, it still brings up homophobia for
Yes.
some reason whenever it's male to male. But if it's male to female, it's like this god awful thing, right? So I think men underreport because I think there's more shame
Yes.
when it's male to male. And I even think that when a woman molests a boy, it can even be looked at, like I shared with you in the comments of, like there's a teacher right now who's drop dead gorgeous, married, and she was molesting and grooming a little boy for like years. She's lied about Formella, I think her last name is, and she has lied about all of it. But the comments are, damn, she's hot. I wish she was my teacher. As if now that just deletes this kid's trauma.
Yes.
Probably makes him question it.
Yes, we could see as gender being consent. The people I've talked to a lot of male survivors of sexual abuse. And one person in particular said that he didn't realize it was sexual abuse until he was perpetrated by a female because he thought this was, the normal thing of becoming a man. Even for me, my first perpetrator was my mom. Like she was treating me like her boyfriend at age 5. My father left. My stepfather went to deployment. He was in the Navy. And so my mom attached to me. So we would go on dinner dates. We would take baths and showers together. We would cuddle at night. And I felt very much like her boyfriend. I felt this overwhelming sense of specialness to her. And I think having been groomed already, like it felt like home, like it felt familiar. And so that really much primed me to be all these things that happened, later in life that
Were
I
you an
didn't catch.
only child? Did you have any siblings? And was there anyone like in your family that had any protection over you?
I had 2 older sisters, and at first I was the golden child, but then when it switches, my stepfather came back, and I was immediately scapegoated. I think my stepfather, he grew up without a mother, and so he saw the relationship I had with my mom and was very envious of it. And when I went into puberty, I started looking like my father, and so my mother hated that. And
Oh,
so I
of course.
became, this you're everything that's wrong with the family, and we're going to put you as a storage unit of shame. And so my sisters, talking about sibling abuse, they would, terrorize me as a child. They would make me run around the house. Like I didn't feel safe without my mom being there because they would do something.
Were they older?
Yeah, they were a little bit older. My sister is 3 years older, and my second sister but is 2 years older than me. So closer in age, but still further apart to like have more of responsibility put on them. And because I was so sick growing up, like I had very severe epilepsy. My longest seizure was 7 minutes, and I almost died from that. I had to be rushed to the hospital. I was giving glucose because I was in shock. I, was having all of these doctors put on me. I was giving the special treatments, and then that like flip sided, and so it's such a mind f because it's like what you get accustomed to that, and it's like, but where did that go?
Yeah, and that's also sort of the last thing I treat someone who's epileptic right now. It's the last thing that you'd want attention for, but if it's the only
Thing you
attention
get.
you're getting that's positive. I also was the scapegoat in my family, and sick families just need a scapegoat. And it all comes down to envy. We seek to destroy who or what we envy if we're not well. And the jealousy of your stepdad, and then maybe the jealousy of your sisters. Are you in contact with anyone in your family, or are you no contact?
I'm no contact.
How long?
Um, Going on a little over 3 years now.
I'm 10 years out in June.
And I'm writing my book now, Surviving Childhood. And
Yay.
it's thank you. It's really meant for survivors of childhood. And I'm running it through, an empathic lens and that lens of attachment. And
Yeah, good.
and so that, has been really therapeutic itself and being able to look back at these experiences. But um my family like was slowly starting to erase me from the family. Like my uncle had his wedding the day before my birthday. The family calendar, each person had their month of the picture of them. And for October, I was cut out. And it was a picture of them and their wedding. When I came back from college, my first freshman year, I was removed from my bedroom and put up to the 3rd floor. And that was turned into a guest room. And so there is this very much this pushing, this weaving out of the
Mhm.
family. I worked my butt off to get into my grad school, but was the last straw for me was I took, 49 credits within a year while doing research, while
Wow. What's your
working
degree in?
biology
Wow.
and yeah, biology and climate science. But right now I'm applying to grad programs looking at clinical psychology, and also um, I'm also throwing in applications in my field to see which ones I get in. But
Congrats.
yeah, thank you so much. I got into this. I graduated. I was top 10 in my class, all of the accolades, and with a learning disability. And it was hard. But I think, when you have anger, it's such a motivator. But that year was my escape. I was planning it took a year to escape from my family. And that's why I took that many credits so fast. And my mom called me pig-headed and stupid for getting into this college I was getting, because it was 1,000 miles away.
Well,
And
she
there
didn't
was
have control over you.
and there was only like an 8% chance I was getting into the school too, but I got in. And um I she hung the phone up at me and she's like, have a nice life. And I was like, kind of put the nail in the coffin there. I packed up all my things, drove away, didn't say goodbye to them, blocked them on everything. I think they figured it out. I went no contact on my birthday because everyone was blocked. But what they did though, and this is what cemented my decision, is when I started talking about my experience, they hired a PI to find me. And they, instead of sending a letter of reconciliation, they had an attorney sent me a desist and
The cease and desist.
desist letter for defamation for punitive damages against the family.
Yeah, actually, because I've written, written like 7 books, but the 3 that are out right now are all on family. We all have a First Amendment right to tell our story, as
Yeah.
long as we don't give identifying names and locations or whatever. They're powerless to that. And I'm sure you've learned that because you're continuing to write your book. And I think what's interesting for other scapegoats listening today is I almost failed 3 grades going through school, and I ended up with a PhD. I think that getting away, once I was out of my house and I got into college, I kind of feel like I came to life because I didn't have so much interaction. I stayed 45 years trying to work with that family. But like you, they cut me out. And that was always the game, cut her off and make her mend the fence. And I just ran out of the bandwidth to do that, which it sounds like that's very similar to your story. Is not all of us go no contact. We just stop mending the fence after we've been, ostracized yet again. I think that when you look at how ignored and how overlooked you were, and then the only attention you were getting was degrading, and it was painful and harmful, it does affect attachment. And I'm really happy to hear you're taking attachment look at your story, because I think that I personally believe attachment styles are relatively permanent. I think that we can grow within our attachment style, but because we have the amygdala and hippocampal areas in our brains that house and store our memories, we can become more securely attached. But I think that at our core, I'm just a fearful, anxious person, and I probably always will be. And I actually have elements of all of them, because I can also be quite preoccupied and very wary of people. So I don't think we always fit into just one style. I think that we have kind of a combo platter. And I would
I
also,
agree with you. Yeah.
yeah, and
I
I'm
think
also think that attachment styles are a beautiful backbone to strengthen your posture on your trauma.
Exactly. And complex trauma, it not just affects how we feel, it affects how we attach. Like, most people who
Totally.
have complex trauma have a disorganized attachment
Oh,
because
yeah.
of the hot and cold, the unpredictability. And I'm very much agree with you. Like, I have a background in psychology. I was double majoring in psychology in my undergrad, but dropped it to escape. And so, like, I took abnormal psych, personality psych, attachment theory, all of these things. And so much of the literature, I will say, degrades people with trauma. And that could be a whole conversation of itself. I think attachment is so connected to our personality. People who are more neurotic are going to have more anxious attachments, because that's just the way they're biologically, the biological component of personality, right? And I think, the idea of being securely attached is kind of bogus because it's like this
Go find me
huge
one.
thing. Yes. Like, I don't think anyone in this world is 100% securely attached with
No.
themselves. I think we have different, our baseline of attachment is, what we form as, the kind of like the motor of the house. But then as we older, we create other, attachments as we get along the way.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
so that's why I agree with
You
like
know
we
that
have
most narcissists test out as securely attached, right?
most narcissists.
Absolutely. Think about them answering those questions. They're so image based
Yeah.
that they would never admit to insecurity or a lack of confidence somewhere. I've test driven that in my own office. If the rare chance that you get a narcissist to come in, they like doing like practical stuff. They usually get brought in by a wife or a husband, right? But yeah, hands down, every single one of mine have answered as securely attached. And I was like, what? I would have thought it would have been dead opposite. But when I think about it, and I really looked at the questions, I'm like, well, yeah, they're asking the questions for optics. They don't know who they are well enough to even answer these questions. So I agree that the whole securely attached thing is just, I think it's fantasy and I think it's kind of inhumane, to be honest. I get that you want a goal to be healthier or more securely attached or whatever, but that really has to start inside you. It can't always be about others. I kind of want to circle back to
Yeah.
um, what would you say? Because I think this is so important for the male voice. What myths or misconceptions about male survivors do you really wish people would let go of or just wake up to them with a new reality? Because I do really want to sort of focus on that male voice. And if there's a male sexual abuse victim listening right now, and they feel invisible, ashamed, too scared to share their story and they feel unheard, what would you say to them? So let's I loaded you down there, but what are some misconceptions you think are
I
happening
think
you wish people
that's a
would
great
just let
question.
go of?
Um, Great question. I don't know if you looked at Dr. Deborah Warner. She did a tech talk on male survivors of trauma. I've probably listened to that 15 times by now. I would say um, we think males who've been sexually assaulted are dangerous because we think that they're going to perpetrate. And the only time we ever hear about a male sexual survivor is when they perpetrated, like Diddy, like,
Sure.
RJ Kelly, like Marlon, I forget his last name, but like,
Wines,
yes.
Wayne.
And so like the only time it's in the media is when it's a perpetrator who's done it. Right. And they also happen to have the backstory of being sexually abused because it messes with people's
It's like
perception
the
of the world.
excuse that they
Yeah.
use. Yeah.
We think um, boys are big and powerful and they're children. What I'm seeing a lot on social media is a huge polarization that all men are bad.
Well,
And
right now, for sure.
yeah, right now for sure. And I say that no child is born bad. It's the indoctrination they get as children that makes them bad. So, boys are told to shut up, and they're fed these grandiose things, right? That's boys are powerful, boys are superior. And so they go out to being, grandiose people. I think, if we want better men, we need to raise more empathic, kind boys and stop saying the messaging that we tell them. I think we need more resources for men. I can't think of a single, shelter for male survivors.
A good point.
And people would say, well, we can combine them with having places with female and male. And I can say a lot of people are not going to want to interact, with that because men aren't going to want to necessarily see someone because it attacks their masculinity, right? That they have to be this big macho person. I think another thing is that somehow boys wanted it.
I was just going
Um,
to say, there's this misconception that all men want it.
yeah. And people ask, well, how come so many gay guys are sexually assaulted? That's the question. I say it's a compound answer, right? We have people who are gay, or when they come out, they are shunned, they are ostracized, and they're more vulnerable to people because it's almost like they're pushed out of the flock, and so they make easier targets for people.
Very true.
And the other thing is, the first time most people hear anything same sex is porn when they're a
Mm.
child. They're not told that two same sex people can have healthy relationships, right? The first thing they're shown is gay porn. And so it makes them more enticed, I think, to almost seek it out or almost be more curious about it because this is what they're first shown. And so I think, we really need to protect our boys more.
I worked in the gay community in Laguna Beach as a resident in the AIDS world. And I treated both gay and straight people with AIDS. And the gays were far more accepting of their AIDS cohorts. Where in the straight community, I mean, they were absolutely treated like a disease. And this is back, I mean, I'm 54. So this was back when AIDS was sort of the big deal. But I would say that I treat both gay and straight men today. And my straight men have more shame about being
Yeah.
molested by a male than a gay man that I've treated that's had, and gay men, I should say, because in that program I was in, most of my men were molested.
Yeah.
And many of them were molested in the church. So by priests. So they had some identity confusion on, would I have been gay had I not been molested? Because of all the grooming. And that was their first love experience, right? So I think that my straight men, if they're brave enough to admit it, it is so shameful for them because of the homophobia that gets attached, right? So I wish our society could just let that go because it doesn't happen to girls. It doesn't happen to girls, right? So what would you say to a gay or straight man that's been molested if they feel unheard or they feel unseen or too afraid to share?
I would say just because you got maybe an erection from it doesn't mean you wanted it. Or
What a good
and
point.
and I think, a lot
Your
of
bed
men.
sheets can give you an erection. It's not like you have a bed sheet preference, right?
Yes. And this is how I compare it. You go to the doctor, they test your flexibility, they take a mallet, they hit your knee naturally pops up, right? It reacted to a stimulus in the environment. When you are being, sexually stimulated, whether you wanted it or not, your body, you know, reacts to, a stimuli in the environment. It's not that you wanted it, it's that your body naturally react to it, just like, your knee being popped up. You didn't want that.
Well,
You
let's
didn't like
even go
that.
this way because people don't talk about this. And I didn't even know this until I had a baby. And I was reading Dr. Sears is The Baby Book. There are women that whose nipples are so sensitive that breastfeeding can cause an orgasm.
Yeah.
Okay, she's not molesting her
Her baby.
child, right? But I had no idea. That did not happen to me, but that has happened. That it's in the book. I was like, wow, I had no idea. So that is such a good point that you're making because I think what happens is it might get into the survivor's mind like, well, I got an erection, therefore that means I wanted it. Well, I can't imagine that the woman breastfeeding her child wanted that to happen. I think it probably scared the shit out of her. And, it was probably something she wanted to stop doing.
Yeah.
Right. So, but our places are made to feel good. That's how they were designed by the universe. Biologically, there are certain areas that are erogenous zones that feel good no matter who or what. Like I imagine a little boy who's just starting to, get all his things. The bed sheets could rub him the right way, or his pocket pants it's like having a pocket pet. It's its own guy.
Yeah.
So I think that the shame that gets put around that is just, it's insane, right?
Like, I tell both survivors, both women and male, just because you have an orgasm, just because you have an erection, doesn't mean you wanted it. That is all a biological process that was out of your control because of the stimuli in the environment. Your body reacted to that. And I think when people can able to separate that it was my body reacting to something, not me reacting to something, they're able to, separate the shame from the event.
Brilliant, David. I'm so glad you shared that with us, because I think to the men who've never said anything, because this is a real systemic problem in our culture, right? Is overlooking the sexual abuse of men as, well, they wanted it, or wow, they were lucky they had that teacher, and I can't imagine. I worry about all these little boys molested by these female teachers. The teachers tend to be gorgeous as well. And I worry about them long term, right? Because I do think it's just a systemic problem.
Yeah.
You've turned your story into this incredible mission to help others. And that's exactly what I did. I turned my predators to a purpose. And for you, what message do you want to put out there to people? And then also, how do you balance your advocacy with also protecting your own emotional well-being?
Yeah. I see as telling my story and advocating as me honoring the little child in me and protecting him that was never seen.
Good.
And like screaming from the mountains almost. I know the first time I ever told my story was Jane Broberg, who's a phenomenal human being. But I told her I want to scream, my story from the mountains because I was silenced for so long. And
You're going to torture
uh,
me in silence, I'm going to heal out loud. It's one of my
yes,
favorite quotes. Yep.
and healing only happens where truth is allowed. When I was listening to these, podcasts that were really helpful, most of it were, female experiences. And though I could relate to the story in some aspects, I couldn't relate to the fact of the female experience because I'm just not a female. And I think that also, you know, sends a message, right, that men can't be abused because the only people who really tell their story are women. And I think we need, more men to come out and tell their story because, I think a lot of men, they like, well, who's this going to help? And I'm like, even if it helps one person, that person is going to go interact with other people. And those people are going to interact with other people. So you're really impacting an entire community. And so I think that's why healing just one person is so powerful because it has cascading effects. And I would say, you know, when it comes to protecting my well-being, I always have rituals set up after I tell my story or whatnot, so I can come back into my body. Because in a way, you do have to somewhat dissociate to tell your story. Um,
Mhm.
and I'm very discerning who I want to share my story with. I've had both fantastic experience and both horrific experiences where I just told them I don't want to move forward. And I think, letting people know that you are the in charge of your own story, right? That no one could heed that from you. And so really being protective of that.
Yeah, I think being in charge of your story allows you to own it.
Yeah.
Um, I've been no contact for 10 years, and it's been the best 10 years of my life. I would say the first 4 years were actually very difficult because I was getting a tremendous amount of post separation abuse. Um, it dollops in now and again, but the triggers just aren't so hot anymore. And if they are, I know exactly how to go to my wounding. It's been 10 years. The more I write, the more I heal. And I'm glad you're going to be writing a book. Make sure you reach out when that book is done, and we'll have you back on the show so that we can get your book out into the world. David, your story is incredible. I so appreciate your time that you spent it with us. It's the one thing you can't get back in life. And so sharing this currency with us means the world. Is there any quote that you live by or anything you'd like to leave the listeners with before we go?
I always say to my story, if you can relate to this, I see you, I hear you, and I love you so much. Like those were words I needed to hear for a very, very, very long time. And so I think, we are made to believe from being abused that is something's wrong with us. But that's only because as children, we have to believe something's wrong with us because believing our parents or caregivers is bad puts our safety and survival in jeopardy. We are not bad. We were raised by people who were bad, but we are not responsible. We're never responsible for our own betrayals.
That's right. My TED Talk, I said, children do not cause bad parents. So, David, in the Therapy Sessions community, we see you, we hear
Thank you.
you, and we love you so much. Thank you so
Thank you so
much
much.
for coming onto the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. We're going to have all your links and all your things in the show notes so that everyone can find you. And thank you for coming out of the dark and speaking truth to reality and giving people an opportunity to see their healing through your journey. And congrats on all of your success and that drive and that will that makes you one badass scapegoat. We adore you here. So, all right, my little community that I love so, so much. I'm sure you enjoyed David just like I did. Again, we'll have everything in the show notes for you to find him. And so until the next couple of weeks, be well and take care of you. Well, Bravehearts, that concludes our amazing therapy session for the day. Please sign up on my email list at drsherrycampbell.com so that you can be in touch with me and see what's going on in terms of what I'm offering soon, what books are coming out, etc. Talk to you in a couple of weeks.